Hi, I'm Codex. This is a reading of Tiny Mixtape's review of Chuck Person's Eccojams Volume 1. Chuck Person, the pseudonym of Daniel Lopatin, aka Oneohtrix Point Never, released Eccojams in 2010. The album is considered to be a foundational influence in vaporwave and online music culture as a whole. Tiny Mixtape's writer Pat Bean placed Eccojams at the top of the site's favorite 100 music releases of the 2010s list. As of 2019, Tiny Mixtapes has been on hiatus. The following reading is Bean's review. Last night, I dreamed I made the perfect Eccojam. You were there, and you were there, and you were there, and you, and you, and you were there, and you were there, and you, and you, and you were there, and you were there too. What were your favorite 50-something minutes of the decade? It took a long time to get here, a lot of scrolling at least, and after 10 years, we're finally wise enough to make the wrong pick for our favorite release of the decade. A pick that can melt the sun if you left it out in the passenger seat. Can you smile about it? Nod knowingly? Maybe happy? Or yawn? Did this wave crash predictably? I believe the Caretaker or DJ Rashad or Grouper or Laurel Halo could very easily occupy this position, though I can hear in Eccojams variations of each of these artists' adaptations to the physical constraints of time. I also believe our staff wish list of personal favorites from the 2010s might have, and should have, effectively made this choice obsolete. But it's a choice we made, and it's one I believe in. Like I believe in ghosts. In some respects, this list meant nothing. In others, it meant the world, to the community behind Tiny Mixtapes. To me, personally, and hopefully to you. I believe Chuck Person's Eccojams Volume 1 is our number one, not because nostalgia won our decade, whether reflective or restorative. We did not spend our decade drowning in the deeps of miserable desire for endless summer nights and the eternal loop. For nothing. We haven't all of a sudden been gifted a deeper appreciation for the afterglowing lineage of the Eccojams limited cassette release, its belonging to the purer internet, or even the premature, inconsistent death of vaporwave. I believe Eccojams is our number one because we at Tiny Mixtapes couldn't get enough of music. And Eccojams of music begat more music, made music in us, made us make music, made us listen better. With every pang and its mutant child of rage, every mixtape sequel, every deleted SoundCloud track, every Liz Harris moniker, Instagram story snippets, Dean Blunt. Through music, we learned how to love this decade. How much of that time was spent wandering the internet? It's hard to imagine wanderlust about the frontier internet anymore. It has been so assumed into everyday life as to make that observation null. But in 2010, when Eccojams was released, there was a little more magnetism in the links. Before torrents trickled into streams, maybe a searching that had been a little less, say, streamlined for easy listening. And so, a reworking of easy listening pop music sounded a special kind of project. Not quite They Live glasses, but at least a message in a bottle.
Hey! Listen!
The most popular lo-fi beats, background listening, live streams artwork is a swipe from Whisper of the Heart, one of my favorite movies. Its original title literally translated as, If You Listen Closely. Maybe Eccojams was our favorite because we wanted to save it from interpretation that would reduce it to the one reading. The understanding that it was a performatively unflattering and grotesque reflection of broken culture. We've heard more than that. We heard it in instructions, lesson plans, accidents, tools, and effects. We heard 100 different ways to say the same thing, 1,000 ways to listen. As much as Eccojams was about casting a revelatory light on the material circumstances of this decade, it was also about our audition, our fidelity to hearing, to listening, which is the beginning of community, of creation. Did you make this? If you weren't paying attention or toiling away on something else, you could mistake anyone's Eccojam for one of Chuck Person's. The creative process was an algorithm, the Swedish directions for a remembering machine. It wasn't a genre of classical nuance, it was about tapping into a feeling, drawing from your own archive, laying bare the beautiful abundance of your hidden resources, like folk music. In a Reddit AMA, Lopatin referred to Eccojams as folk music, and in doing so, suggested a hybridization of the polar organizations of composition laid out in Brian Eno's Generating and Organizing Variety in the Arts. Eno references the hidden resource of folk music, which are the valuable idiosyncrasies of the individual performer, as compared to some classical music's more rigid commitment to algorithmic formality that bows to hierarchical value systems. Eccojams were a charged program then, in their strict, open process. Run a loop sample of radio music through a simple filter. The contradiction was how this rigidity transformed our ability to appreciate the smallest moments of MOR songs. Make them as unnerving or thrilling as laying in the middle of the road. There was more than you thought possible, and now nothing felt impossible. Ultimately, we arrived at the not always foregone conclusion that changing environments require adaptive organisms. Another not always foregone conclusion. If you find yourself overly dependent on a coping mechanism, it must not be working well enough anymore. This was a decade that pressured us to play it cool and/or self-manifest as homo superior. Nowhere could this desperate adaptation be seen like it was in memes. By virtue of its archive in fried architecture, Eccojams became the premier musical representative for meme culture, stacking levels of awareness, repetition as the medium, the message unfolding forever, like the scroll of the Caretaker, an edited collage of Pablo, a language of infinite collaborative possibilities, of mutually unknowing interconnectivity via parasitic networks, self-modifying code, and layers of referential knowledge, all drawing from the most popular well, the well of loneliness. And so, Vaporwave was a genre and an internet meme. Chuck Person wasn't a sole author. Before Eccojams, there was sunsetcorp, Daniel Lopatin's YouTube channel channeling YouTube surfing, which included the best ever Eccojam, End of Life Entertainment Scenario Number 1. To be found nowhere and everywhere on this release. These media mediations prefigured the more unsigned emotional rummaging of Replica, which was our favorite album of 2011. Yet, there was even more to love here in Eccojams, maybe because it seemed to be made with us in mind, the way a friend who's only a couple steps ahead of you can recommend affordable therapy or provide a listening ear. What a gift to be able to let go of what doesn't work and to hear something that does. What are some songs that you love, that you can share with your friends? What makes you want to make an Eccojam? What are some things you don't like about Eccojams? These were labors of love, tracing the footsteps of the screw tapes. As in DJ Screw's chopped and screwed mixes, there was the idea that these song choices might be invitationals, appeals to recognition that get you thinking of the potential in songs, your own potential. That Daniel Lopatin modeled Eccojams, and indeed took his moniker after a soft rock radio station, Magic 106.7, speaks to his sentimental attachment to this music. Realizing this project is about channeling a connection to the radio, that this is not only a restaging of cultural detritus to reflect the heartbroken smoothness of capital and mass culture, meant the world to me, and I think you could hear it all along. Chuck Person was a sincere YouTube commenter from 2012, an avatar that revoked the supremacy of the original over the derived, to invoke Adorno's precious contempt for the impossibility of genius, writing about bourgeois moral gold. This love opened the door to so many possibilities for the derivative, the incidental, the illegitimate, the usurpers. I believe these songs could wear their bent edge color Xerox unoriginality on their sleeves without hating themselves, without being statement pieces, perhaps just posing in front of the mirror, wearing themselves out like makeup or magnetic tape, feeling themselves. It's not mere critique, it's a love letter. It's so head over heels, it repeats itself. Like history. Getting not funny. A man who has somehow managed to corrupt the grossest seat ever. Utter ecological catastrophe, multi-billionaire space races, police state terrorism. It's the same Billy Joel or New Radicals or whoever's song. Echoes and continuities of crises from decades past, no less important or crucial. In fact, with increasing additive importance, we're in crisis mode. Indeed, a crisis ordinary. It would be easier and not usurping to seek refuge in exhaustion, nostalgia, denial. We looked at the brokenness of the decade, itself a post in a feed, grew riven by towering fixtures and ideological fixity, and we heard the relentless, unchanging repetition of Eccojams, and couldn't help but remember, in the words of Marvin Lynn, our Mr. P, writing on Eccojams for 33 1/3, nothing is truly fixed, and everything is ripe for transformation. We heard a tension for the decade, the radical possibilities of the ever-unfolding and rapturously enfolding loop, and the conservative impulse to hole up in exactly what we already knew we loved and preserve it forever at any cost. When I was at my worst, I loved writing out the spins. The looping of Eccojams made sense in the way ad nauseum and ad infinitum could feel part and parcel of going in and going out and going in and going out. It was Eccojams that I stuck my head in, and it was Eccojams that pulled me through. In the lamentable years of my life, years of this decade, that I spent alienating myself from those I loved most with my drinking, I could at least attach myself to the feeling of memory, of misconnections, of another chance. Somewhere on the horizon was the sunrise, where my salvation lied, at the edge of tomorrow. It was Zek who introduced me to OPN, then pronounced Oneohtrix, and Eric Copeland and Brahms and all that manner of other stuff, and it was in this room where we would just sit and listen. And drink, yes, with abandon. His bedroom had a door in each of its four walls, one of the kitchen, one of the bathroom, one of his roommates, and one of the street. I spent many nights trying to convince him how if you stood at the center of the room and spun 90 degrees repeatedly, you'd be faced with the exact same wall at each turn, over and over. I was not listening to myself. I was obviously not paying close enough attention, but I hoped he would get the gist. It was Zek who told me to get a grip. Advice for the young at heart: soon you will be older. When not much else obviously presented itself as an option, Eccojams were a coping mechanism with few moving parts, little mystery, yet somehow still full of little mysteries. Like years later, years after throwing up on Zek's floor and falling asleep in doorways, waking up in a hospital halfway the morning after my patron saint's holiday, only to be told I wasn't the only one. Hours after I'd been listening to only one. A salve for the repetition of addiction, found in the repetition of loops. These loops I made not only out of self-destructive habit, but prayerfully, with half-empty optimism, for my own ears, for no good reason. Eventually, I started listening, actively listening. Daniel Lopatin was a good teacher in this sense, thanks to humility. Before the world building and world premieres, when he was clothed in Chuck Person, there was an intentional practice, founded in the belief that rudimentary tools and a simple ritual could create cosmopoetic composabilities for listening, which instilled in us at Tiny Mixtapes the belief that these messed up little songs could become gateways. Door to another, door to another, door to another, door to another, door to another. As soon as you're listening for the echoing words in between, listening to B1, when that parenthetical turns into a portal, you find the door in the back of the wardrobe. And there, you find not yourself, but yourself listening for the sweet relief of that bass swell, the cooing hum that reliably zooms into the mix before never, the softly winding pan synth that uncoils around Proud, artificially bound by your relation to the music, into presence. In the presence of each other, we found no stickier drama than the planetary entanglement of our relationships. Coincidentally, or however bound, we found each other in the title-locked orbit of Tiny Mixtapes, where we heard your readership, and more writers who weren't writers, but historians, and web designers, and teachers, and parents, and students, and friends. Our listening brought us closer together, into the belief that through listening and the music itself, we wouldn't achieve actualization or revolution, but that, if we listened closely, we would become unafraid, and nothing would be unthinkable. maybe we'd be sensitized to the possibility of each release, remembering that just about anything could make us exclaim, Eureka! And then we'd repeat ourselves, listening for the call and response of our love, the deep in me calling the deep in you, side A, side B. We learned a lot from a few seconds of that song, Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel, now nothing more or less than Chuck Person. A mantra and a close read, a wave of sound, crashing whatever meaning was transmitted, now transmuted, into the choppiness of the sea itself, like the water covers the ocean. So Eccojams is a stand-in for everyone and everything. The memories that looped in your head, the memories you wished did, the songs you dreamed of making, the times and time you wish you had. A part of me wanted to write this whole thing without mentioning Daniel Lopatin at all. This release belongs, after all, to YouTube uploaders, Audacity users, and Chuck Person. Carelessly thrown together, a cut of meat used for stewing, an individual, one of the triune components of God. No goodbyes, just hellos, just hellos. In the fade-out song on Eccojams Side B, a resplendidly remade loop of Woman in Chains by Tears for Fears, the shimmer, a freaky chorus effect, I think, keeps approaching and receding over the sample, never not there in the mix, until it overtakes the words, transforming the song and the tape into the glow. The loop opens up into a slow fade-out that transitions into your life's sounds, as long as you turn off autoplay. In the last song, maybe you felt the rush of recognition, or maybe you felt held by the sureness of the synth returning again and again. And if the song connected, if Chuck Person echoed your feelings, you heard your heart beating. We couldn't have made it in the decade without you. I believe that's why Eccojams is our favorite. Our favorite music release of the decade is something you could have made.